Aussie dollar, what would you be doing ahead of the budget, or would you wait until post?
I think it's not looking too flash, is it, after the retail sales numbers? That was another blow, back-to-back negative readings there. Weather may have been a factor in terms of how wet it was on the East Coast. Certainly was miserably wet in Sydney in March, so there may be a little bit of an impact there, but overall it's a further soft consumer spending. That's a familiar story now, so that's been another reason to sell the Aussie. The leverage funds and futures markets are still rather long Aussie. They've trimmed their positions, but I think that does leave the Aussie vulnerable. So I think near-term risks, particularly with that instability we've seen in Chinese financial markets lately, for instance, their stock market being the only major market in Asia to have fallen yesterday, the impact that's had on iron ore prices as well. I think the risks are to the downside. So I think you'd be pretty brave if you're buying the Aussie dollar ahead of the budget today and ahead of that ratings agency announcement. I think the risks are increasingly looking as though we'll test 73.
Okay, Sean, let me ask you about the Korean won, because there's an election happening there today. Of course, the overall equity markets in Korea are shut, but of course the currency is trading as always. What do you think that the trade is when it comes to the won, given there's a fairly strong lead in that election?
Yeah, look, the market clearly seems comfortable with the options it has in terms of the leading candidate. So it doesn't look as though it's a great worry for them. And overall, I think you'd have to be very impressed with the way the Kospi's traded over recent months, given the great tensions, particularly mid-April, over North Korea. So foreign investors seem to really like Korean equities and Korean bonds. So the KTBs have seen heavy inflows. So I think overall, while clearly the interest rate story is moving away from the Korean won as the Fed looks set to raise rates again in June, I think overall they're just low volatility that you're mentioning earlier with VIX, and just the global optimism and improvement in global trade means that I think dollar won is probably heading lower and probably back to test some of those levels we saw earlier this year.